The phone call came late on a Thursday afternoon, just as Claire was about to shut down her laptop. She had spent most of the day finishing a design project for a client and was looking forward to making a cup of tea and watching something light on TV. When her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize, she almost ignored it, but something made her pick it up. "Hello, is this Miss Claire Thompson?" a man's voice asked, polite and distant. "Yes, this is Claire," she replied cautiously. "My name is Thomas Whitaker. I'm an attorney calling from Lincoln County, Maine. I'm reaching out regarding the estate of a Miss Margaret Hale." Claire frowned, searching her memory. The name sounded familiar but distant, like a word she had once read in an old book. "I'm sorry, I don't think I know. Wait, was she my great-aunt?" "That's correct," the man said. "She passed away 2 weeks ago. You're listed as her next of kin and beneficiary." For a moment, Claire didn't know what to say. Her parents had never talked much about that side of the family. She remembered visiting Maine once as a little girl, but her memories were blurry, just flashes of a large old house, a smell of lavender, and a woman with silver hair smiling softly from a rocking chair. That must have been Aunt Margaret. "I didn't realize she was still alive," Claire said quietly. "Yes, ma'am," the attorney continued. "She lived alone for many years. In her will, she left you her property, a house and some personal effects. If you'd like, we can arrange for you to come and review the estate when it's convenient." Claire thanked him and hung up, sitting still for a long time afterward. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in her small apartment. She didn't know whether to feel honored or burdened. She had never inherited anything before, and certainly not a house in the middle of nowhere. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was this woman who had lived alone for decades? Why had she chosen Claire, someone she barely knew, to inherit her home? Curiosity began to grow stronger than hesitation. By the weekend, Claire had made up her mind. She packed a small suitcase, rented a car, and started the long drive from Chicago to rural Maine. It felt strange, like she was driving into a forgotten corner of her own family's past. The farther she went, the more the world seemed to quiet down. The roads narrowed, forests thickened, and cell service faded away. It was early autumn, and the trees were painted in deep shades of gold and crimson. For a while, she felt calm, almost peaceful, until she realized just how empty everything around her was. By the time she reached the small town of Newcastle, dusk was falling. She stopped at a gas station to ask for directions. The old man behind the counter raised his eyebrows when she mentioned Margaret Hale's name. "Ah, the old Hale place," he said, scratching his chin. "Hasn't been anyone up there for years. Folks say the road's rough now. You'll want to go slow. It's easy to miss the turn." He scribbled a few directions on a piece of paper and wished her luck. The way he said it made Claire's stomach tighten. It took another 30 minutes of driving through, winding dirt roads before she finally saw it. The house her aunt had left. It sat on a rise surrounded by tall pines, their branches swaying gently in the cold evening air. From a distance it looked grand but tired, like a forgotten character from a different time. The white paint had peeled away. The porch sagged in the middle, and ivy had claimed most of the walls. One of the shutters banged softly in the wind. Claire parked and got out, standing in silence. The smell of damp leaves and earth filled the air. There was no sound except for the wind and the occasional creak from the house itself. When she stepped onto the porch, the wood groaned beneath her feet. The front door stuck a little before it opened, releasing a breath of stale, dusty air. She coughed, covering her mouth as she stepped inside. The first thing she noticed was how still it felt, as if time had stopped years ago. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and the floorboards were coated with a thin layer of dust. Sheets covered the furniture, ghost-like shapes in the dim light. Yet beneath the neglect there was something oddly beautiful. On the wall hung several old photographs, black and white portraits of people she didn't recognize. Their eyes seemed to follow her as she moved through the room. On a nearby table sat a porcelain teapot, cracked but clean, and a small vase filled with dried flowers. Claire felt a strange mix of sadness and wonder. She could almost imagine her aunt sitting here drinking tea by the window, watching the seasons change. She walked slowly through each room, touching the edges of furniture as if trying to feel the house's memories. In the kitchen, she found a stack of yellowed letters tied with ribbon. In the living room, a record player sat quietly beside a shelf of old records. She lifted the lid and smiled. The last song played was still on the turntable. It felt like stepping into someone's life just after they had left the room. As darkness settled outside, Claire decided to stay the night. She had brought a sleeping bag and a flashlight just in case. She found the least dusty room on the second floor, what looked like a guest bedroom, and spread her things out. The air was chilly and the wind whispered against the old windows. Lying there, she listened to the house. Every creak and sigh seemed to have meaning. It was both peaceful and unsettling. Before she drifted off, she thought she heard something faint, a soft tapping sound from somewhere down the hall. She sat up holding her breath, but it stopped. She laughed nervously to herself. "Old houses make noises," she whispered. That's all it is. The next morning, light spilled through the thin curtains, and Claire finally saw the full extent of the place. The house was large, with 2 floors, an attic, and what looked like a cellar door out back. The property stretched far into the woods. Despite its decay, it had character: carved stair rails, arched doorways, and stained glass windows that caught bits of sunlight. She made herself a cup of instant coffee on a small camping stove she'd brought, and sat on the porch, breathing in the cool morning air. The forest around her was quiet except for birds calling in the distance. That's when she noticed something strange. The flower vase on the hall table, the one with the dried flowers, was now filled with fresh daisies. Claire froze, staring at it. She was sure it had been old and brittle the night before. She hadn't brought any flowers. And there was no one else around. Maybe the lawyer had come earlier, she thought, or maybe she had simply misremembered. Still, a small chill ran through her. She walked through the house again, taking pictures for the lawyer's report. Everything was just as she had left it, except for small things she couldn't quite explain. The curtains in the kitchen, for instance, had been drawn open, though she was sure she had closed them before bed. A faint scent of perfume drifted through the hallway, soft and floral, like lilacs. The deeper she went, the more she felt watched, not in a frightening way, but as if the house itself was aware of her presence. In one of the upstairs rooms, she found a large wooden trunk. Inside were family keepsakes, embroidered linens, photographs, and a small diary wrapped in lace. She opened it carefully, and her heart skipped when she saw the handwriting. It was delicate, elegant, and signed Margaret Hale. Most of the entries were from decades ago. Some described daily routines like gardening, reading, writing letters. But one short note near the end caught her attention. "If someone finds this house one day, I hope they see what I saw. Not the decay, but the beauty that lives quietly beneath it." Claire read it twice, then closed the book gently. It was such a simple line, yet it made her chest ache. That evening, she walked outside and looked at the house again. In the fading sunlight, it didn't look so broken anymore. It looked old, yes, but proud. The kind of place that had seen too much to be ordinary. Maybe she would stay a little longer, she thought. Maybe just to clean it up, to understand who her aunt really was. As she turned back toward the door, a faint melody drifted through one of the open windows, soft piano music, coming from the living room. Her footsteps froze. The record player was playing again. She hadn't touched it all day. Claire stood still in the doorway, listening. The faint piano melody drifted through the house, soft and distant, as if it were coming from another time. Her pulse quickened. She had left the record player closed that morning. She was sure of it. For a few seconds, she considered running back to her car, but curiosity held her still. She took a deep breath and slowly walked toward the living room. The air felt cooler there, as if someone had just passed through. The record player was spinning, the needle gently gliding across the vinyl, playing a tune she didn't recognize, something slow and haunting. The chair near the window rocked slightly, creaking in rhythm with the music. Claire froze, every sense awake. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the music stopped. The room fell silent, except for the quiet ticking of an old clock on the mantel. Claire stood there for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. "Old houses have their ways," she whispered, forcing a small laugh. But deep down, she knew this was more than a house settling. Something about it felt personal, almost like the house was trying to speak. She gently lifted the record needle and examined the label. It was an old jazz record, one she'd never heard of. The date printed on it read 1948. On the inner sleeve, a faint handwriting caught her eye. For M, your favorite song, the letter M. It had to be for her aunt, Margaret. Claire put the record back carefully and stood by the window looking out at the yard. The morning mist was just beginning to lift and sunlight touched the tops of the trees. She tried to make sense of the strange events. The fresh flowers, the opened curtains, now the music. Maybe it was all coincidence. Or maybe someone had been in the house recently. That thought made her uneasy. After breakfast, she decided to check around the property. She pulled on her jacket and stepped outside. The ground was damp with dew and her shoes sank slightly into the soft earth. Behind the house, she found a small path leading into the woods. Branches bent low over the trail and the air smelled of pine and wet leaves. The path led to a small clearing and what looked like an old shed. Its door hung slightly open, creaking in the breeze. She hesitated, then pushed it wider. Inside were rusty tools, broken flower pots, and stacks of firewood. A faded calendar on the wall showed the year 1996. It didn't look like anyone had been there in years. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A wooden crate pushed against the back wall. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were several picture frames. She wiped away the dust and gasped softly. Each frame held a photograph, black and white portraits of her aunt as a young woman. In one, Margaret stood beside a man in uniform, smiling shyly at the camera. In another, they were sitting on a picnic blanket near a lake. The man's arm was around her shoulders. He had kind eyes and a gentle smile. On the back of the photo, written in neat script, were the words, "Summer 1944, our last day before he left." Claire felt her chest tighten. So her aunt had loved someone once, maybe a soldier. She wondered what had happened to him, and whether that was why her aunt had lived alone all those years. When she carried the photos back into the house, she noticed something new. On the hallway table, next to the vase of daisies, there was now a small silver locket. She hadn't seen it there before. Carefully, she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a tiny photograph, the same man from the picture, smiling in his uniform. On the opposite side was a lock of hair tied neatly with a blue thread. Claire sat down slowly, the locket trembling in her hand. She didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but she couldn't deny the feeling that her aunt's presence lingered here. Not to frighten her, but to be found. Over the next few days, Claire stayed in the house. She started cleaning one room at a time, sweeping the floors, dusting the shelves, and opening the windows to let in fresh air. The more she worked, the more the house seemed to change. It no longer felt cold and lifeless. The sunlight reached farther, the air grew lighter, and the silence no longer felt heavy. She played the record again one afternoon, and for the first time the music felt comforting. As the tune filled the room, she could almost imagine her aunt dancing slowly in that very spot, lost in her own world. Later that day, she decided to explore the upstairs study, a room she had barely glanced at before. The door was half closed, and when she pushed it open, a faint smell of old books and dust greeted her. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with journals, letters, and faded photographs. On the desk lay a single envelope with her name on it. Her hands shook a little as she opened it. The paper inside was yellowed but neatly folded. "My dear Claire, if you are reading this, then it means I have finally gone to rest. I do not expect you to remember me, but I remembered you. The curious little girl who once wandered my garden and asked too many questions. I saw something in you that day. I saw someone who listens, someone who sees beauty even when others don't. This house is full of stories, and I believe it waited for you. Inside its walls are pieces of the life I once lived, some joyful, some painful, all precious. I hope you'll treat them kindly. Perhaps in time you'll understand why I stayed here all these years. Yours, Margaret." Claire read the letter twice, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't a ghost story. It was a message of love and trust from someone she had almost forgotten. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the desk. That night, she sat by the fireplace with a blanket and her aunt's diary. She began reading, page by page, drawn into the quiet life her aunt had lived. Margaret had written about her garden, her love of music, and the man she had lost. A man named James who had gone to war and never returned. He promised to come back by Christmas, one entry read. I waited every winter after that, but the snow always fell without him. Claire closed the diary and stared into the fire. She could feel the depth of her aunt's loneliness, but also her strength. This woman had chosen to live surrounded by memories, not because she was trapped, but because she refused to forget. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling softly through the trees. The sound reminded Claire of a song, that same tune from the record player. It was strange how the house seemed to hum with its own rhythm, almost alive. Over the next few days, Claire uncovered more secrets, small, delicate ones that painted a clearer picture of the woman she was only just beginning to know. Behind an old wardrobe, she found a stack of paintings wrapped in brown paper. Each one was signed with a small MH in the corner. The paintings were stunning, soft, dreamlike landscapes of the forest around the house, portraits of people she didn't recognize, and one painting that stopped her completely. It was a portrait of the man in uniform, James, sitting at a piano, smiling. The painting looked unfinished, the brushstrokes near his hands fading into blank space. On the back, in small letters, was written, "I painted him from memory. It's all I had left." Claire gently leaned the painting against the wall. Her chest ached with emotion. This house wasn't falling apart because it was forgotten. It was full of love that had simply gone quiet. That evening, she went outside and looked up at the sky. The stars were bright and close, and for the first time she didn't feel alone. She spoke softly into the night. "I think I understand you now," she said. "You didn't want to leave because this place held everything you loved." A soft breeze brushed her cheek, almost like a touch. When she turned back toward the house, the windows glowed warmly from inside. The house that had once felt empty now looked alive. Later, as she walked through the hallway, she noticed something new again. The vase on the table now held wildflowers, freshly picked. She smiled instead of feeling afraid this time. "Thank you," she whispered. Before going to bed, she sat at the old desk again, the one in the study. She opened a blank page in her aunt's journal and began to write her own words. "My name is Claire, and I came here expecting to find a broken house. Instead, I found a life, one that still speaks through walls, through paint, through the sound of an old song. I think I'll stay a while. There's more to discover, and I want to keep listening." As she set the pen down, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The wind outside quieted. The house seemed to rest too, as if it was content knowing its story was being heard again. Claire turned off the lamp and went to bed. Down the hall, the record player began to spin once more, softly playing the same gentle melody. And this time she didn't stop it. She let the music play. The next morning, Claire woke early to the sound of birds singing near the window. Sunlight poured softly through the curtains, lighting up the dust in the air like tiny floating stars. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she looked around and remembered the house, the letter, the diary, the music. She stretched, still wrapped in her blanket, and smiled faintly. The house didn't feel strange anymore. It felt alive, like it was breathing with her. She got up, made herself some coffee, and walked through the rooms barefoot. Each floorboard creaked under her steps, but instead of sounding lonely, it sounded familiar. She had planned to leave that day, maybe drive back to the city and tell the lawyer she'd seen the property. But the thought made her uneasy. Something about this place kept calling to her, like a quiet voice asking her not to go yet. There were still too many questions, too many pieces of her aunt's life left to understand. After breakfast, she went back to the study. The letter from Margaret still lay on the desk, along with the diary and some of the photographs she had found. Claire decided to organize everything. Maybe if she laid it all out, she could start to see the full picture. As she sorted through the piles, she noticed one thing she hadn't seen before. The bookshelf against the wall looked slightly uneven. It tilted forward just a little, as if something behind it was pushing it out. Curious, she stepped closer and ran her fingers along the wood. The shelf didn't seem attached to the wall like the others. She gave it a gentle tug, and to her surprise, it moved. A narrow gap appeared at the side, just wide enough to slip her hand through. Claire's heart started to race. She pulled a little harder, and with a low creak, the bookshelf swung outward like a hidden door. Behind it was a dark, narrow passageway. Her breath caught. She shone her phone's flashlight into the space and saw a small room, maybe 10 feet across, filled with boxes, stacks of old papers, and what looked like paintings leaning against the wall. She hesitated for a second, then stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of oil paint and old paper. Dust covered everything, but it was clear that someone had spent time here once. Someone who worked quietly and carefully. She found a table with brushes, jars of paint, and several half-finished sketches. One sketch showed the face of the man from the photographs, drawn with such tenderness it almost felt alive. Another showed the house itself surrounded by tall trees, but in the sketch it looked brighter, almost glowing. In the corner she noticed a stack of old journals bound with string. She untied one and flipped it open. The handwriting was her aunt's. "I dreamt of him again tonight," one entry read. He stood by the piano, smiling the way he used to. The song was playing, and he said the same words, "Don't let them take it." I woke up with tears on my face. Claire frowned. "Don't let them take it?" What did that mean? She turned the page. "The painting must stay hidden. They think it was destroyed, but it's here where it belongs. It's safe as long as I am." Claire froze. Her eyes scanned the words again, her pulse quickening. A painting that was thought to be destroyed, hidden in this house? She looked around the room more carefully. There were many paintings stacked together, but most were clearly her aunt's work. Then, in the far corner, she noticed one covered in a thick cloth. The frame behind it looked different, heavier, older. She walked over and lifted the cover gently. The moment she saw it, she gasped. It was a portrait, not of her aunt, not of James, but of a young woman sitting beside a window, painted in incredible detail. The colors were faded but still rich. The brushwork was unlike anything her aunt could have done. This was the work of a master artist. Claire stepped back, heart pounding. Could this be the painting her aunt had written about? And what did she mean when she said, "They think it was destroyed"? She checked the back of the canvas and found faint writing along the frame, a name she didn't recognize but knew must be important. It looked like the signature of a famous painter. Claire sat down on a nearby stool, her mind racing. How had her aunt come to own something like this, and why had she hidden it? She read more from the journal, flipping through the pages. "They were taking everything," one entry said. "Art from homes, from galleries, from people who had nothing left." He couldn't bear it. "He saved what he could, and when he left, he gave me this one painting. He said it must survive, even if we didn't." Claire's chest tightened as she realized what the words meant. Her aunt's lost love, James, must have been involved in saving art during the war. And before he left, he had given her one piece to protect. Margaret had kept it safe all her life. Claire looked at the painting again. It was no longer just a beautiful object. It was history, a secret that had survived because of love and promise. She felt both amazed and terrified. This was worth a fortune, and more than that, it carried stories that museums would kill to uncover, but her aunt had hidden it for a reason. Maybe she didn't trust anyone to keep it safe. Claire spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything carefully, taking photos, writing notes, and wrapping the painting back in its cloth. She wanted to tell someone, but she didn't know who she could trust. As the day faded into evening, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, staring out at the trees. The air was cool and the sunset burned orange across the sky. She could almost feel her aunt's presence beside her. Calm, quiet, protective. "What do I do with it?" she whispered. "What would you want me to do?" The wind rustled through the trees as if answering. She smiled faintly. "I'll keep it safe," she said softly. "Just like you did." Later that night, as she was getting ready for bed, she heard something again. The same soft piano tune drifting through the halls. This time it didn't startle her. She walked quietly toward the sound and found the record player spinning again. The song played gently, wrapping the house in warmth. Claire sat down in the same chair where her aunt might have sat years ago. She listened to the melody, feeling comfort instead of fear. Then, just as the song reached its final notes, she noticed something glimmering in the corner of the room. It was a small metal box, half hidden under the edge of a rug. She pulled it out and placed it on the table. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to her aunt from the same man, James. The earliest was dated 1943, the latest, 1945, the year the war ended. Claire opened one carefully. "My dearest Margaret, the night before I left, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of the music we played and of the painting. If I don't make it back, promise me you'll protect it. Promise you'll keep it somewhere safe, somewhere quiet until the world is kind again." Claire's throat tightened as she read the words. Her aunt had kept that promise for more than 70 years. She read several more letters, her eyes blurring with tears. Each one was filled with tenderness, hope, and faith. The last letter ended abruptly, a final goodbye without saying it. She closed the box gently, holding it close to her chest. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the creaks of the house, feeling more connected to her aunt than ever. The story unfolding before her felt larger than anything she'd ever known, bigger than the house, bigger than herself. In the morning, she decided to reach out to someone who might help her learn more about the painting. She found the number of a local museum in town and spoke to an art historian named Daniel, who sounded kind and curious. He agreed to drive out and take a look. When he arrived that afternoon, his reaction said everything. The moment he saw the painting, his eyes widened. "My God," he whispered. This shouldn't exist. It was thought to be destroyed in a fire decades ago." Claire told him everything she had discovered, the letters, the journals, the secret room. He listened quietly, visibly moved. "Your aunt must have been an incredible woman," he said softly. "She saved something priceless, not just in value, but in meaning." When he left, Claire stood at the doorway watching his car disappear down the road. She turned back toward the house and smiled faintly. Her aunt's story wasn't over. It was just beginning to be told. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Claire walked through the rooms again. The walls seemed warmer, the air lighter. She whispered, "I'll take care of it, Aunt Margaret. I promise." And somewhere deep in the house, the piano song began to play one more time, soft, gentle, and full of life. The morning after the historian's visit, Claire woke up feeling lighter yet restless. The air inside the house was calm, but her mind was full of thoughts. What her aunt had protected all those years was not just a painting, it was a promise. A secret carried through decades. And now that secret rested in Claire's hands. She stood by the window watching the forest shimmer in the soft morning light. Mist curled between the trees and the sound of distant birds filled the quiet. It was peaceful, almost unreal. She wondered how many mornings her aunt had stood in that same spot, thinking of the man she loved and the painting she was sworn to protect. For the first time, Claire felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about uncovering the past anymore. It was about honoring it, giving meaning to everything her aunt had done. She made a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the journal. The pages had become her connection to Margaret's heart. There were still more entries she hadn't read, and she turned to one marked with a dried flower pressed between the sheets. "The days grow quieter, but I no longer feel alone," it said. "The house speaks to me in its own way. Every creak, every shadow feels like a reminder that love doesn't leave. It lingers." Claire closed the journal and smiled. She knew that feeling now. That afternoon, she decided to visit the small library in town. It was an old brick building with large windows and the faint smell of paper and dust. Inside, the librarian, a kind older woman named Ruth, greeted her warmly. When Claire mentioned her aunt's name, Ruth's eyes softened. "Oh yes, I remember Miss Hale," she said. "Quiet lady. Always came here for old art books and history records. Never said much, but she had this calm about her, like she carried stories no one else could see." Claire told her about finding the journals and the painting. Ruth listened, her expression a mix of surprise and wonder. "She always kept her world private," she said. "It doesn't surprise me she had something special tucked away." Before leaving, Ruth handed Claire a stack of local history books. "Maybe you'll find something useful in here," she said. Back at the house, Claire spent the evening going through the books, flipping through pages until something caught her eye, a small newspaper clipping from 1946. It told the story of a cargo train that had been destroyed during the war, believed to have been carrying stolen artwork. Among the missing pieces was a painting by a famous European artist, the same signature that appeared on the one hidden in the secret room. Claire leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding. The article confirmed it. Her aunt's painting was one of those believed to have been lost forever. She imagined the moment James might have given it to Margaret, asking her to keep it safe. The thought filled her with both sadness and admiration. He must have known he might not return. The next morning, Claire called Daniel, the historian, and told him what she had found. "That fits perfectly," he said excitedly. "The story makes sense now. He must have rescued it before it was taken, and your aunt safeguarded it all these years. But what happens now?" Claire asked quietly. "Do I return it to a museum?" There was a pause. "That's your decision," he said gently. "You're its legal owner now. But maybe the best way to honor her is to let the world see what she protected." After hanging up, Claire sat in silence for a long time. She looked around the house, the worn furniture, the quiet walls, the faded wallpaper, and she felt her aunt everywhere. That evening, she took a walk down the path that led to the old shed. The forest was alive with the sound of crickets, and the setting sun painted everything gold. She carried a small lantern, watching her own shadow stretch across the ground. She stopped by the clearing and sat on a fallen log. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered softly, "I'll do it, Aunt Margaret. I'll tell your story. I'll make sure people know who you were." A soft wind stirred through the trees, and for a moment, she felt warmth brush her cheek, as if the house itself had sent its blessing. The next few weeks passed quickly. Claire began cleaning every corner of the house, not just to restore it, but to prepare it. She decided to open it one day to visitors, not as a museum filled with expensive things, but as a place of remembrance. A place where love and art could coexist just like they had in her aunt's heart. She started sorting the letters and photographs into frames, labeling each one carefully. The diaries she placed in a glass cabinet in the study. The painting, still wrapped for safety, she kept in the hidden room for now, planning to display it only when everything else was ready. She worked from morning till night, often humming along to the old piano record. It had become her favorite part of the day, the moments when the music filled the air and made the house feel whole again. One afternoon, while cleaning the upstairs hallway, she found a small key taped under the edge of a dresser drawer. She didn't know what it opened, but something about it felt deliberate, like another secret waiting to be discovered. After trying every lock she could find, she realized it fit the cellar door behind the kitchen. She turned the key, and with a reluctant groan, the old door creaked open. A damp smell rose from below. She shone her flashlight and began to descend. The cellar was cool and quiet, lined with stone walls. There were shelves full of jars and boxes, but in the corner, something was covered with a thick sheet. When she pulled the cloth away, she found an old wooden chest. Inside were more journals and older than the others, and stacks of letters wrapped with ribbon. She opened one and saw handwriting that didn't belong to her aunt. It was James's. "I can't explain everything here," the first letter began. "But if you ever read this, know that I did what I had to do. The art we saved wasn't just paint and canvas, and it was people's memories, their hope. I only wish I could have brought it all home to you." Tears blurred Claire's vision. She ran her fingers over the ink, imagining her aunt reading those same words years ago. There were several more letters, each one more tender than the last. They spoke of dreams, of longing, and of the life they had planned to build together after the war. Claire sat on the cellar floor, reading until her eyes grew heavy. When she finally closed the last letter, she whispered, "You kept his promise alive, Aunt Margaret. You really did." That night, as she sat by the fireplace, she thought about how love had shaped everything, not just her aunt's life, but her own. She had come here expecting to find a broken house, but instead, she had found something sacred, proof that love could endure time, silence, and even death. The next morning, she made her decision. She called Daniel again and told him she wanted to host a small event at the house, an open day to share the story of Margaret and James and the painting that connected them. Daniel agreed to help, and soon word began to spread through the nearby towns. Local people, art lovers, and even reporters wanted to visit the house that kept a secret painting. When the day finally arrived, the house looked beautiful. Claire had cleaned every window, polished the wood floors, and filled the rooms with fresh flowers. The portraits and letters were displayed neatly, telling the story of two lives joined by art and love. As people walked through, they spoke in hushed voices, touched by what they saw. Some paused by the piano, where the old record player softly played the same tune that had once filled the halls long ago. When it came time to unveil the painting, Claire stood in front of the crowd and took a deep breath. "This painting was hidden here for more than 70 years, she said. "It survived because of one woman's promise. My aunt, who believed that beauty and love are worth protecting, even when the world forgets them." She pulled the cloth away, and gasps filled the room. The portrait shone under the light, every brushstroke alive. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the applause came, gentle, heartfelt. Claire smiled, tears in her eyes. She looked toward the staircase, and for a second she imagined her aunt standing there, smiling proudly. That night, after everyone had gone, Claire sat on the porch, watching the moon rise over the trees. The house glowed softly behind her, filled with warmth and laughter that seemed to linger even after the guests had left. She whispered into the quiet, "You can rest now. They know your story." And from somewhere deep within the house, the faint sound of the piano began again, a gentle song of peace and memory. Claire closed her eyes and listened. The tune carried through the air like a promise, reminding her that love never really leaves. It just changes shape, waiting to be found again.